Everything you think you know about the dignity of the papacy is wrong. What if I told you that in the year 897, the corpse of a dead pope was hauled out of its tomb, dressed in full liturgical silk, propped up on a throne in the Lateran Basilica, and publicly interrogated by the man who now wore his ring? You didn't learn this in history class. Textbooks won't tell you that the trial was so grotesque that for centuries the Vatican itself tried to erase the entire episode from its archives. But it happened, and it gets worse. Wait until you hear what happened next. 1. The smell hit first. Roman summer, August 897. The Tiber had burst its banks weeks earlier, leaving the city a stew of sewage, rotting grain, and malaria. Inside the Lateran, the air was thick with incense failing to mask the stench of putrefaction. The body, 9 months in the grave, had been wrapped in linen soaked in myrrh, but nothing could stop the leak of black fluid through the seams. Witnesses later swore the skin had slid off the hand like wet parchment when they lifted it. Pope Stephen VI, some manuscripts call him Stephen VII Rome, couldn't even keep the numbering straight, sat on the episcopal throne, pale beneath the triple tiara. He was 27, younger than most parish priests, appointed by the powerful Roman family, the Spolti, after they bribed, threatened, and probably poisoned their way to the papacy. Stephen's eyes, contemporary chronicles describe them as ferret bright, twitching, were fixed on the corpse they had dressed in the full pontifical vestments, the red chasuble embroidered with gold lambs, the white alb yellowed where bodily fluids had seeped through, the stole still crusted with earth from the grave. A deacon, voice cracking, read the indictment. The dead man, Pope Formosus, was charged with perjury, illicit ambition, and violating church canons by accepting the papacy while already bishop of another diocese, Portus, the port city of Rome. In modern terms, he'd been a bishop of 2 places, a technicality, but the Spolti needed a pretext. Stephen leaned forward. Answer, he hissed at the corpse. Silence. A trembling teenage acolyte, later identified as John, son of a Roman senator, was shoved forward. He acted as the dead pope's advocate, a macabre public defender role. He stammered that his client, being deceased, could not speak. Stephen's response was already scripted. A deacon had been rehearsing for days. He crouched behind the throne, cupped his hands, and in the high, strange voice a child uses to mock an elder, squeaked, "I am guilty." The crowd, mostly Spolti retainers, city toughs, promised free wine, roared approval. You don't learn this in church tour. 2, but it gets worse. Wait until you hear how they got the body. Formosus had died on 4 April 896. His reign had lasted 5 turbulent years. He'd crowned the German King Arnulf as Holy Roman Emperor in direct defiance of the Spolti faction, who wanted their own guy, Lambert of Spoleto, on the imperial throne. When Formosus died, probably of malaria, though whispered poison never died, the Spolti immediately installed their creatures in the Lateran. Formosus was buried quickly in St. Peter's, the only place in Rome the new regime didn't fully control. Stephen, elevated in haste, had to move fast. A living pope can excommunicate, but a dead pope can still be a symbol. So at dusk on 12 August 897, a gang of Roman soldiers and cathedral workmen broke into St. Peter's crypt. They shattered the marble sarcophagus with iron bars, dragged the body out by the feet, the head striking each stone step with a sound witnesses compared to a melon rolling downhill, and loaded it onto a fish cart normally used for hauling river eels to market. The cart left a damp trail through the torchlit streets. By morning the corpse was in the Lateran baptistery, submerged in a vat of salted water to slow decay. Modern forensic anthropologists estimate that a body in Rome's summer heat would reach bloat stage within 48 hours. The leakage described by chroniclers matches the purge fluid typical of a 9-month-old cadaver. In short, the pontiff was soup. Yet they dressed him anyway, fingers snapping off when rings were forced over knuckle bones. They shaved his beard, post-mortem haircut being an ancient Roman sign of dishonor, and propped open the jaw with a crucifix so the corpse could witness the proceedings. Textbooks won't tell you that part. 3. The trial lasted 6 days. Each day the corpse was redressed in lighter vestments because the fabrics kept soaking through. On day 3, the right arm detached at the shoulder. They tied it to the torso with purple silk. On day 4, the nose collapsed. They stuffed it with cotton soaked in rose oil. Day 5, the skin tone was described as the color of storm clouds shot through with lightning, a poetic way of saying green-black. Stephen grew bolder. He cross-examined the body on the specifics of the 896 imperial coronation. Did you or did you not on the day of the feast of St. Matthias, placed the crown on the head of Arnulf, a man excommunicate. Again the deacon behind the throne squeaked, "I did. I was blinded by pride." The crowd was encouraged to hurl insults. Monks spat. A prostitute climbed on a bench, lifted her skirt, and yelled, "Take my testimony," a scene so scandalous that even the hardened Roman mob fell silent. On the final day, Stephen pronounced sentence. Formosus was stripped of all papal authority. His acts were annulled. His fingers of consecration amputated the thumb, index, and middle fingers of the right hand, used in blessing, and the body cast into the Tiber. But it gets worse. Wait until you hear what the river did. For they threw the corpse off the alien bridge at twilight, weighed down with stones in a sack. The Tiber, swollen by summer rain, carried it only as far as the next bend. A monk named Arsenius, collecting water for his monastery's garden, saw the sack snag on a fisherman's weir. He dragged it ashore, recognized the pontifical stitches on the sodden silk, and fainted. When he came to, Arsenius did what any terrified 9th-century monk would. He hid the body in his monastery cellar under casks of new wine and prayed for instructions. Within days, the wine began to taste corrupted, a sour metallic tang. Pilgrims reported dreams in which Formosus, face dripping, begged for burial. The cellar stank so badly that neighboring vineyards accused the monks of witchcraft. Meanwhile, Rome imploded. Stephen's victory felt hollow. Even his own supporters began avoiding him. The city's poor, always Formosus fans, because he'd fed them during famines, whispered that the Tiber had rejected the insult to God's anointed. Miracles were claimed. A blind girl touched the water where the body had lain and saw a demoniac, shouted, "Return the shepherd to the fold," and collapsed cured. Stephen responded the only way he knew: more trials. He had Formosus's elected successor, Boniface VI, posthumously condemned for irregularities. He dug up 2 other dead bishops and had their bones flogged. Rome began calling him the Gorgon Pope, a man who could not blink. Modern psychologists reading the chronicles see classic escalation. Having committed an atrocity, Stephen needed to justify it by expanding the scope of enemies, a pattern repeated by dictators through the ages. Think of Stalin airbrushing Trotsky out of photos, or the Khmer Rouge murdering people for wearing glasses. In 897, the only technology available was exhumation. 5. It gets worse, because the dead pope fought back. In January 898, 8 months after the Cadaver Synod, an earthquake shook Rome at dawn. The Lateran's frescoed walls cracked, a chunk of cornice fell, and crushed Stephen's throne. He interpreted it as divine warning and fled to the Castel Sant'Angelo, the fortified mausoleum of Hadrian. There he barricaded himself with loyal mercenaries, convinced angels or assassins would come for him. They came in the form of his own cardinals. One night in July, guards unlocked the postern gate for a delegation bearing papal seals. Stephen had been deposed in absentia by a synod in Ravenna. The chronicles disagree on details. Some say he was smothered with pillows, others that he was flung from the castle walls, wearing the papal tiara weighted with lead. The common thread is that his body was left naked in the square where horses were watered, a deliberate mirror of the indignities he had inflicted on Formosus. No pope since has chosen the name Stephen. You won't read that on the Vatican website. 6. But the story isn't over. Because Formosus's corpse, still hidden in the wine cellar, had one last journey. The new pope, John IX, needed reconciliation. In 900 he convened a new synod, revoked Stephen's condemnations, and ordered Formosus reburied with full honors. The body, by now a skeleton held together by desiccated ligaments, was dressed in new vestments and carried in procession to St. Peter's. Along the route Romans knelt, touching the bones with rosaries and scraps of cloth they believed would become relics. John also legislated the Oxford Rule, so called because the earliest surviving copy is in Oxford's Bodleian. No future pope could judge his predecessor. It was the first written safeguard against posthumous vendettas, an ancestor of modern constitutional protections, yet even this felt fragile. Formosus's name was quietly removed from some official lists. For 2 centuries, the Vatican librarians filed the trial records under miscellaneous. When the Great Basilica was rebuilt in the 1500s, workers found a small lead box inscribed Formos Papa tucked inside a pillar cavity. Inside were finger bones and a note, "May his rest be longer than his torment." Textbooks won't tell you where that box is now. 7. So why should you care about a 1,100-year-old corpse trial? Because the same mechanisms weaponized outrage, spectacle justice, the rewriting of past legitimacy are live streaming on your phone. When modern autocrats dig up the reputations of dead rivals, when social media mobs posthumously cancel artists, when conspiracy theories exhume long-buried scandals, we're watching the Cadaver Synod in 4K. Stephen VI wanted the world to believe that history is clay in the hands of power. The Roman crowd, desperate for bread and circuses, applauded while a corpse was made to confess. Replace incense with ring light selfies, replace the Tiber with algorithmic feeds, and the dynamics rhyme. Everything you think you know about progress is wrong if we can still be roped into cheering the degradation of the helpless alive or dead. You didn't learn that in history class, but now you know, and it doesn't end here.